Hello and welcome to Liberty Hub Defending the West. Happy Tuesday. If you thought Trump killed the American dream, think again. Here's a headline that would have been impossible to imagine 4 years ago. Who is the American dream assassin? Trump, Jesus, or Marx? Seems like a pretty obvious position, but suddenly it's not. Many people violently disagree with it for reasons that still are not clear, but definitely are not rational. So, the ideals of the American national ethos, in which freedom includes the opportunity for prosperity and success, as well as an upward social mobility for the family and children, achieved through hard work in a society with few barriers, is killed, demolished, betrayed upon by the evil shadowy silhouette in the corner of your neighbor's apartment. Now, you may have thought that this was a debate that was settled conclusively back in the 19th century, when there was the rise of populism, the labor movement, and Jacksonian democracy. Also when it ushered in the Gilded Age, when the effects of modern biblical scholarship on the churches started to ignite. And in Europe, there was a general move away from religious observance and belief in Christian teachings, and a move towards secularism. And here we are today, seeing an ultimate link between the new religious order that analysts believe to no longer praise God. We take a look at the Bible in the American culture, then we delve right into the punishment of prayer through the removal of crosses from schools. We later touch upon Alexis de Tocqueville's summons on Christianity in America and what got us from Tocqueville to Bernie Sanders. Here's a fun challenge. Want to join an exciting revolution where we end slavery, treat every race as equal, topple corrupt institutions, fight for justice, champion the oppressed, acknowledge our original sin, take a knee and create a better world by treating our neighbor as ourselves? Then join Jesus Christ. I want to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Mihail Namtsu. Thank you for joining me today again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mike, I even finished my high school in Los Angeles. It was an Episcopal school. I got accepted to Pepperdine, which is also known as one of the major Christian universities in the United States. And the American ideal, this American way of life, was praised on Christianity. But what is this new American life and deal that we need to prosper from?
It's not American anymore. It's cosmopolitan, it's a globalist philosophy of life, which means you do not have to have a sense of belonging. We've touched upon this in our previous conversations. America was certainly founded by people who believed in God, who basically left England because of the persecutions there. There were some, as we know, Protestant groups which were very much persecuted by the Catholic establishment in the 17th century, and they wanted to be allowed to worship freely in a new country, and that was America for them. So they set off from Plymouth, Great Britain, towards America. And then later on, we had waves and waves of other Protestant, Catholic, and even Orthodox Christians settling in America. It's interesting that we had Catholics settling in Maryland, for instance. We had Orthodox, later on at least, settling in Alaska. Lots of Russians left Russia and went to America via Alaska. And obviously, we had Protestants coming from Central Europe, from Germany in particular. Even the family of Donald Trump has some roots in Germany. Your Episcopalian school was somehow related to Mr. Trump's mother, because she was also an Episcopalian when she left. I think we touched upon this previously, when she left Scotland on the 2nd of May 1930. She had only a Bible in her hand, and she was very much brought up by this biblical ethos of the Scottish peasants, farmers, and fishermen, who genuinely believe that the most important book in the history of the world is the Bible. Now, what we have witnessed in the 20th century, as you've rightly pointed out, it was the complete destruction of any sense of piety, which is, I think, strange, because even the pagans had a sense of piety. If you think of St. Paul, when he comes to Athens, he descends upon the city, as it were. He comes into the city, into the marketplace called Areopagos. He sees lots of statues and pious people worshipping a kind of God. And there was a particular altar called To the Unknown God, and he says, this unknown God is what I'm bringing to you. But what he praised was their ephseveia, which is piety, sense of awe and mystery. Yeah? There is something powerful greater than ourselves which we traditionally tended to worship. Historians of religion like Mircea Eliade emphasize that every human being needs to contemplate the unknown, to grasp this mystery of the universe. Now, an extreme rationalist view of the human person started to replace the previous philosophies of human existence of the 19th century, for instance, the transcendentalist movement, just an example, Emerson. And with John Dewey and other secular professors basically ruling the minds, as it were, of the students in the interwar America and later on after the Second World War, we started to see a rejection, a complete rejection of the theological and moral, even moral, premises of Christianity. And that's why in your school, probably, did you pray before attending?
Of course, yeah. We had, even there, it was Campbell Hall in Los Angeles, we had every Wednesday chapel, and even the leaders of our school, they were reverends.
Okay, so in your situation, it's more of an exceptional situation. People still believed a direct personal connection to God was necessary for you to develop your intellectual horizon.
If I may read exactly from the website's main page, Episcopal Identity plus Chapel. We are an Episcopal school that welcomes people of all faiths. Spiritual development is at the heart of everything we do at Campbell Hall. We continue to honor the Episcopalian tradition as a place of open inquiry and spiritual formation.
Yes, that's probably more of a conservative type of Episcopalianism. For sure, this doesn't happen in many parts of America and in Great Britain. I was a student at King's College, and I have to say we visited Sinai, Mount Sinai, the place where God, according to the Bible, revealed to Moses the Ten Commandments. We climbed the mountain. It was a powerful moment at 4 o'clock in the morning. Then we went to visit other places such as the monastery of St. Catherine, and then we went to see the famous cell of a hermit called John Climacus. So when I came back from this trip, which was more of a pilgrimage to Egypt, I came back with a beautiful icon. Whether you believe or not in the sacred representation of Christ, it's still a powerful symbol of, ancient Christianity. So I brought with me an icon of Jesus Christ dating from the 6th century, a very powerful image of Christ. And I gave it to the head of the department of theology at King's. And I was told we can't put Christ in the center of our seminar room because we might offend the Muslims. And I realized that basically such decisions taken sometimes by the school administrators or by the university managers, not necessarily by the teachers, they will destroy any sense of identity. So we've got this mantra, new mantra of multiculturalism, as if you are a multi-person. Obviously, you are Anna Maria Păcuraru. You are working out your own identity. You have a certain past. You are both Romanian and American in a way. By your upbringing, you are American. By your historic roots into your family, you are Romanian. So you have this interesting mix. Now, your identity is stable only because it's your identity. There's no such thing as a fluid identity. America today seems to be embracing a new notion, that of a fluid identity. And that's oxymoronic, that's philosophically incoherent.
Mike, that's very interesting, but coming back, who killed the American dream?
I think this is the most important question of 2020, the year zero. If you're a person from outside America looking at the events of the past month, happening right there in Los Angeles, in Seattle, or in Washington, D.C., not to mention New York, you'd for sure ask yourself, after watching a few minutes of footage of the riots, of the lootings that have happened and are still happening, how did America betray its founding principles? The rule of law, strong families and a powerful civil society, equality under the law, fair trial by jury, the right to bear arms and private property. I feel great anguish that men who have enjoyed the greatest benefits of America by and large did not support the leadership of Donald Trump in his noble proposals at Mount Rushmore a week ago. Did the American people elect those Democrats and the few rotten Republican representatives and senators so that having been granted to such high positions should consider the Republic as nothing? Not only did no Democrat verbally support Donald Trump, No one supported him even by a show of respect. For pity's sake, what is this voluntary slavery to the anti-American feelings? To appease the Jacobins of today, Antifa, and the fascist intifada of Black Lives Matter? Why is it that so many American citizens are kneeling down and squandering away their dignity and liberty for civility, except for a few certain outstanding men standing up for the glorious revolution of 1776? And most importantly, who killed the American dream? Is Trump to be blamed, or the white Jesus? Or is it the false gods of the revolutionaries on the streets of America, that is social justice and the so-called historical progress? Why are the elites worshipping such vague and dangerous abstractions? I find the vastness of this answer astonishing, as one can start discussing this subject from a miasma of angles, all under the immoral shadow of Karl Marx, as what has killed the American dream can be attributed to a limitless amount of things, including politicians, journalists, CEO executives, university professors, social media parrots, and whatnot. Once every conversation reaches the question of why it happened, people should not gloss over who started it in the first place. And that can start very simply by putting one's sights on the dogma and principles of the infamous Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, the thoroughly Marxist bracket that has anticipated and advocated for many of the events and cultural changes that have been seen throughout the West during the past 30 years until the present status quo. For example, the destruction of the nuclear family, a father, a mother, and the children. That one single unit of the American Republic and of our Western civilization that has kept it together through the good, bad, and ugly over the past 3 centuries, has been ripped right open by the legacy of one and only Marxist theoretician called Max Horkheimer. If only this buffoon and his comrades wanted anything that was in the people's interest, it is him, a philosopher with no God and no sense of piety, who introduced the idea that, and I quote, "it is not economics that creates oppression, but rather the nuclear family, traditional institutions, traditional morality, and concepts of race, gender, and sexual identity. These are the chains of tyranny which must be broken by revolution," end of quote. But if these chains of tyranny ever existed, would there have not been an attempt to rebel by those oppressed by now under the nuclear family? Oh, the traditions are to blame, so bring forth the permanent revolution. The cataclysmic occurrence of the male patriarchy. And so from Max Horkheimer and many others of his fellow travelers, the Frankfurt School, we have a whole legacy that has been bestowed upon and promulgated by thousands of American university professors, alternating between being armchair intellectuals, indoctrinating the youth with their fallacious nonsense for the past 50 years, with no single imposition of checks and balances on them by the government, or by the families, or by the teachers, or by the professors, or by their own universities, repeating and hiding under the pretense that their so-called academic freedom is being threatened, as if their own ideology does not aim to evict and eviscerate every other dissenting view from the general public discourse in their universities and beyond. They are also being insulated from every criticism, and if you bother enough, with empirical evidence obviously, to rebut all their historicist dogma, they will try to shut you down unless you are on board with their beautiful ideas of social justice, progress, equality at any cost, and their interpretation that the West is to be blamed for every single suffering non-white people have incurred throughout the annals of history. And the sense of order in American society, which starts with the family, has been also killed. We are now left, and I said left, with this mess of decadence, the orgy of violence, nihilism, and relativism that is suffocating the last remnants of a once admirable and inspiring ideal, the American dream. The dream which kept my ancestors looking at America. No wonder the number of divorces every year is increasing exponentially, that more blacks are now being raised by single mothers, and that the women that were raised by single mothers further propagate the dilution of the pillars of marriage through repeated generational acts of divorcing their male partners. So they killed the idea of the Father, and then the divine Logos, the Father, that grounding first principle of metaphysics, who is the bringer of order, stability, and restraint. Certainly, the Father is not the Dionysus of lust, decadence, and incontinence. So can we say that Trump is the one to be blamed for what's wrong with America? Not at all, as he was, among many others, brought under a happy, virtuous marriage. He also invoked, as we all know, the immortal memory and wisdom of the founding fathers, of Thomas Jefferson, of George Washington, of John Adams on the 4th of July. So, if not Trump, then is Christianity to be blamed? Or namely, Jesus? No, as he too, Jesus, had a family. He had Mary and Joseph, and then a heavenly Father, who is also the father of every Christian on the planet. So then, what about Marxism? The family of Marxism can be described as being without any equal for evil on the planet. Think of China, think of Vietnam, think of Soviet Russia, think of Eastern Europe, think of Cuba, think of Southern America and Africa. If evil was ever a metric to judge by a family, their descendants can be traced to the totalitarian atheism of the Jacobins in France and the false gods of the 1789 revolution. Pay attention for a moment, my dear Marxists, and try to think like a sober person for a little while. It is the unholy trinity of moral relativism, historical falsehood, and aesthetic ugliness that dominates your thought. It is the sword of Damocles, only centimeters away from slashing the throat of Western civilization. It is not Jesus to blame. Jesus recognized the right to private property. He gave men and women dignity, worth, and freedom from sin. Better watch out, as your property will be taken away faster than one of Elon Musk's rockets if they get the chance to do so. It only takes a change in direction to go from looting and burning shops and supermarkets to raiding apartments and those who live in the suburbs. From Jesus, we all have gotten benefits, spiritual gifts that have been deeply beneficial to Western society, the gift of peace and love and charity for the entire world, not at least of all the United States of America. This religious sentiment, the so-called opium for the people, as the Marxists call it, is the one and only glue that has made America rise from a loose federation of 13 colonies to the towering economic colossus of a global superpower that is today. But in the age of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, the much glorified elites of today will have you know that that is wrong. You would be particularly astonished by how much they spend to enforce their views over your own. That Christianity is a bigoted, tyrannical, and primitive cult centered around the white Jesus, the child of God, that according to them has been whitewashed and fetishized by white people for the past 2,000 years. I wonder what Pontius Pilate would say about this, or Peter, the apostle. Nothing of the sort. But what does this all mean, this dismemberment of the American dream that is being completed by the current Marxist revolutionaries and their illiberal elite supporters? Why? They will let you know the hard way what this all means and why it's happening. starting with you having to bend the knee, that is, demanding the very same thing that the bloodthirsty kings of Persia demanded from the ancient Greek military men: earth, water, and absolute enslavement. Slavery is the worst of all evils and must be driven off by war or even by death. But if the extant memory of the founding fathers have removed themselves from our sight, still they have left us the example of their bold action. They accomplished what no one else had accomplished before, seceding from the most powerful empire of the past 1,000 years, the British Empire. That action itself is remarkable, of divine inspiration, and held up as our model, especially since they have won glory which almost seems to reach past heaven. Remember this: you can take the knee and be a slave, or you can take your sword and fight for liberty, for Christianity, and for the American dream.
That goes straight up to our next subject that I want to touch base upon with you, the Bible in the American culture. Respected Bible teacher Amir Tsarfati tweeted earlier this year a segment from one of Trump's speeches, and I quote, "In America, we do not punish prayer. We do not tear down crosses. We do not ban symbols of faith. We do not muzzle preachers and pastors. In America, we celebrate faith. We cherish religion. We lift our voices in prayer, and we raise our sights to the glory of God." Well, that seems pretty clear to me. President Donald J. Trump is safeguarding the right to religious freedom for students and organizations. These actions build on President Trump's long-standing commitment to safeguarding the fundamental rights to religious freedom. For example, during his first year in office, President Trump signed an executive order upholding religious liberty and the right to engage in religious speech. President Trump also signed an executive order recognizing the essential contributions of faith-based organizations and establishing the Faith and Opportunity Initiative. The administration continues to unequivocally stand up for religious liberty in the court's duet of President Donald J. Trump. President Trump also reversed the Obama-era policy that prevented the government from providing disaster relief to religious organizations. Moreover, last year, President Trump hosted a global call to protect religious freedom event at the United Nations and called on the international community and business leaders to work to protect religious freedom around the world. The administration has stood up for religious liberty around the world, partnering with local and faith-based organizations to provide assistance to vulnerable religious minorities. Need I say more? The list goes on. Donald Trump is a solo fighter against the hoarders of far-left fascists who want to destroy the United States, freedom, and civilization. A fine example of this psychedelic quality almost of our new society is an article that appeared a few years ago on CBN, stating that a federal judge rules cross violates law and must be removed. Atheists across the fruited plain were rejoicing after a federal judge declared that a cross erected in a Florida park violated the law and must come down. And I quote, "I am aware that there is a lot of support to Pensacola to keep the cross as is, and I understand and respect that point of view," U.S. District Judge Roger Vinson wrote in his ruling. The lawsuit was filed by the notorious Freedom from Religion Foundation and the American Humanist Association on behalf of 4 Pensacola citizens. The judge pointed out that the park has hosted tens of thousands of people for roughly 75 years without causing anyone offense until now. Should Christian citizens be relegated to some sort of second-class citizenship? Should they be directed to keep their beliefs hidden inside the church house? Will they demand that city leaders rename Los Angeles and San Francisco? Should the 10 Commandments be chiseled off the doors of the Supreme Court? Should references to God be sunblasted from our national monuments? Just how far do the atheists intend to go in this cultural jihad on our Christian values? What is your opinion on this, Mike?
I do believe that what's going on in America has already happened in Europe, but unfortunately it happened under communism. As you well know, the first thing that the communists did in 1947 when they came here, because they came from Soviet Russia, was to burn books and to destroy or to demolish such symbols, crosses in particular, and statues. I think what's going on is a clear indication that the elites in America have been convinced by the so-called ideological truths of the Marxist Frankfurt School of theory, many people don't know that for many, many decades, the elites have been brainwashed by this notion that religion is the opium for the people. And as I said, there's a fight for the public square which needs to be fought not just by the politicians, such as Mr. Trump or maybe Mike Pence, who deserves some credit, and Mike Pompeo as well, and Ben Carson as well. But this fight for the public forum or for the public square has to be fought by the citizens themselves. And I think, you know, as we saw people, the mob actually, destroying symbols, crosses and statues, we could see also people, citizens, dignified men and women who could protect, who could just physically protect such symbols. And that would show some strength on our side.
Well, the ideas that you talk about should be implemented, I think, throughout school and throughout a child's lifetime, because they are the future leaders of the world. They should be the one to further protect Christianity. But what about the removal of crosses from schools? What about hiding crosses in schools? A single anonymous complaint is forcing a New York school district to cover a cross hanging on the side of a school building. The large cement cross hangs outside South Richmond High School in Staten Island, a school well known for serving special needs children. The building used to be a Christian orphanage dating back to the 1950s, but now the school leases it from the Catholic diocese. Although the 8-foot cross has been embedded into the building for more than 50 years, it only took one anonymous parent's complaint to force the school district to cover it, according to Fox News. Now, a large red sign saying South Richmond High School, home of the Panthers, covers the historic cross. The decision sparked controversy, with many questioning if one person's hypersensitivity trumps religious freedom or history. Yet, those who support the cross's removal say this issue is about separation of church and state. How would you comment on that?
I'm asking perhaps you this time. Why can we have in America places where you have the LGBT flag displayed in front of many kids, though it's not necessary to talk about sexual orientation when you are a child of 7, but you can't have a cross showing the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on behalf of us all? First of all, Jesus was real. He was a real historical figure. He died in Jerusalem in his 33rd year of his life. We know the benefits of the gospel. We know that the gospel has influenced for the good. Lots of thieves, prostitutes, harlots have embraced Jesus Christ symbolically, spiritually, and they have changed for the better. We know that they stopped being murderous people, they stopped being thieves, and they basically transformed entirely their lives. We don't really know what these new ideologies insisting on always changing your sexual orientation. So while we know the good that Christianity has provided the world with, we don't really know how these sexual ideologies influence for the good the humanity by and large. So my point is, if we ask for neutrality, then let's have neutrality for all groups. If we want to live in a peaceful society, we have to have respect both for the majority, which can be a Christian majority in a particular school, the one you've just cited, and for the minority, which can be a sexual minority. But I think without any spirit of tolerance, there's no way forward. We need to practice, to cultivate tolerance and love and charity more on the one hand, and we need to stop asking the state to be the arbiter, to be the one who decides what is good and what is not for a particular local community. So I would say we have to stop this interference coming from the federal state into the local communities, and that will clearly respect the American tradition of localism.
Looking at contemporary scholars, journalists, and politicians who are deeply divided with respect to the religious or secular character of America's founding principles, in sharp contrast to the narrowing tendencies of contemporary intellectual and political life, Tocqueville's classic study of democracy in America is the first of any scope to give weight to America's dual founding, biblical and philosophic. For Tocqueville, it is the combination of two different traditions, neither of which can be reduced to the other. That is the hallmark of the new political science he bequeaths to the dawning democratic age. Mike, I would like to draw out the natural state of religion in a democratic society, particularly as it comes to light in America, as we see Tocqueville's attempt to address the particular problems and possibilities to which it gives rise. What is to be learned from Tocqueville?
Alexis de Tocqueville was a great French aristocrat. He left France in 1831 together with a friend. His friend was called Jean Beaumont, I think, and he came to America in order to discover how this great nation is being built, because in the 19th century America was still very much an emerging power. He came to America and he wrote a wonderful volume, a book about the American lifestyle, the American, I would say, mindset. He doesn't just talk about various institutions, but he talks also about the morality of the civil society. He talks about how women and children behave. He talks about how the local parish, the local Christian community is contributing to various charity, for instance, goals, such as, saving a family after their house was burned, perhaps, or such incidents that always affect a local community. Now, what's interesting is that Tocqueville comes from France after the, I would say, tyrannical and traumatic event of the French Revolution. Remember that his mother was nearly killed by the guillotine, the so-called guillotine in France, which was a very real device which would cut, basically, your throat. It happened to almost 40,000 aristocrats, priests, and noble people, and he was horrified. Obviously, when he was very young, he said, "Oh my God, I'm in France, the so-called civilized nation of France, of Voltaire, of the Enlightenment, but look what's going on the streets of Paris. I need to see what's going on perhaps in another democratic, proper democratic society such as America." So he traveled to America with great hopes, and his hopes were not discouraged, because what he found was a vibrant civil society. So what did he see? He saw the family, the traditional family centered around the pater familias figure. So you've got the father, the provider, the bread provider. You've got the mother who would always take care of children, who would also take care of their education. Homeschooling was very, I'd say, very widespread in those days. And then apart from the family unit and, of course, the relatives, you've got the church. So it was the family and the local church which would provide the two poles of a daily life for any American. Now, Tocqueville visited America also at a time when lots of Bibles were being printed and read in small book clubs. We don't have that anymore, but we have perhaps the virtual reality in which people meet and talk about things that are of common interest, and the Bible is still present, thankfully, in the American society. So Tocqueville wrote very positive remarks about the contribution of religion and of the traditional family to this fortification of the civil society. What is the civil society? Is that nexus of or network of, I would say, institutions which are organic, and they are born without the state asking you to participate in their creation. For instance, you get married not just because the mayor tells you so, or because the governor, or because the Republican senator or the Democratic congressman tells you to do so. No, you get married because it's your desire to do so. You raise children because that's a calling which is, I think, ancestral and which transcends whole secular institutions. So churches are being organized and families are being organized naturally, organically, in this spontaneous order of the civil society without the state interfering. What happened after Tocqueville passed away in the 20th century is that the state started to interfere more and more and more. So the state being led by bureaucrats, you've got more and more bureaucrats from Washington, D.C., from the federal government, trying to tell you, a person in Texas or a person in, I don't know, Arkansas, how to live your life. And that gradual erosion of localism on the one hand, participatory democracy, the town hall meetings and all that, but also the erosion of traditional families in the light of the new models propagated by Hollywood, you eventually ended up with this mess. Essentially, it's a mess. America is at a crossroads.
Transcending to a contemporary world, Bernie Sanders appears to think all we need to be happy is more money. Alexis de Tocqueville dismantled that idea 2 centuries ago. Since the self-described Democratic Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders is a major contender for the Democratic Party's nomination for president, and polls suggest 1/3 of American millennials and over 40% of self-described Democrats view socialism favorably. Perhaps it's time to be attentive to great 19th century French thinker Alexis de Tocqueville highly critical opinion of socialism. Sanders made clear that he did not favor government control of the means of production a la Marxism, Leninism. Sanders also specified that he supported private businesses as long as they don't shift assets and jobs offshore, and thinks innovation and entrepreneurship should be reworded. Well, Bernie Sanders is a socialist. How do you comment on that in relation to what Alexis de Tocqueville taught us on socialism?
Well, again, you know, some people don't really want to learn from history. Bernie Sanders was 30 years old, I think, when he went to Moscow in 1988. Remember, the entire Eastern European culture was suffocated by Stalinism, by Leninism, by communism. And he decided to go to Moscow in order to celebrate his love for his partner, for his wife. Now, who would do that? And he did it because he has an ideological understanding of the world. He doesn't look at reality. What does it mean to be an ideological person? It means to never take into account the figures, the dramatic events taking place in front of your nose, but rather to still believe in your mindset, in your own abstract notion of, you know, philosophy of history, progress, social justice, and so on and so forth. So Bernie Sanders is an ideologue who doesn't really care about the facts. He doesn't care about the fact that 100 million people were killed by the communists in China and in Soviet Russia. So he is an ideologue in the sense that he still believes in his abstract notions of social justice, equality, irrespective of the horrors happening right now as we speak in perhaps Venezuela and Cuba. My disappointment with Sanders is not that he is a socialist, but that lots of young people follow him by just ignoring what happened in our country, in our part of the world, with our generation of young students, and with the young students of Hong Kong, with the young students of Taiwan. So
it's a widespread of legitimate frustration from crony capitalism.
So to some extent, he does speak to those young people who have nothing in their pockets. It's true. I mean, basically, lots of young people leave the university indebted to banks and other financial institutions. They have to work for maybe 10 years, 20 years to pay the debt because sometimes they make bad decisions. You know, I don't really know what ethnic studies or gender studies would provide you with on the market, as it were. And so Mr. Sanders is appealing to such frustrated individuals, but he doesn't offer them a solution. He just tells them, you know, that their debt will be cancelled without telling them that their children will inherit a national debt. You know, remember that famous saying, "Blessed are the young, for they shall inherit the national debt." Now, Bernie Sanders doesn't tell them the truth.
So he could have been the next US president, but let's not tell him that because that will make him only more anxious.
I think the case is settled. We have now probably the choice between
Biden and Trump.
Biden and, I would say, no, Biden, and a possibility could be still, I think, the wife of Mr. Barack Obama, Michelle Obama. That's a possibility. However, Tocqueville would be an author, a must-read author for any socialist in America, because Tocqueville is a true and honest, genuine, I would say, scientist who comes to America in order to document, not to build up a doctrine of his own, not to philosophize as Karl Marx, not to bring about a solution for the entire planet as Lenin perhaps thought. No, he comes to America with that humble attitude of a true scientist who just wants to assess, to record facts and events, and then he's presenting them to you in a genuine and in a very sincere fashion. Now, that kind of honesty and academic transparency and accountability is absent from the American colleges today. We need to retrieve not just the ideas of Tocqueville, but his intellectual honesty.
Well, I think that Alexis de Tocqueville should be studied not only in the American system, educational system, colleges, and maybe even high schools, as I have heard about him in my senior year of high school in Los Angeles, but I think it's also important to read and learn about it also in Europe, in Romania, more specifically, so that we know the mistakes that others have made for our future leaders, not to repeat them.
Intellectual honesty is critical for all ages, and I think truth always sets us free.
For sure. Thank you very much, Mike. This concludes our third show of Liberty Hub Defending the West. Thank you very much for your presence, and we look forward to our next show.
Thank you.